The world of trading card games is a ruthless one. Many hundreds have met their fate and died. However, the remains they leave behind never truly vanish from this world. Welcome to Cards from the Abyss!
Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and welcome back to Cards from the Abyss. Today we're going to be taking a look at an interesting new game. We are actually going to be talking about a mega license game. Now, what is a mega license game? Now, last time we looked at the card game Yu Yu Hakusho, which is a licensed game. That is, they, rather than making their own from-scratch brand new intellectual property, they instead take a brand, or like a movie, a TV show, some kind of series that already exists, and develop a game based on it. There were a ton of these back at the turn of the millennium. However, licensing games are pretty difficult. I made a whole video on the subject, and these days you won't see a game based on like a single franchise unless it's like already a huge hit or the franchise itself was developed to promote the card game, although those are also becoming increasingly rare. On the other hand, a mega license game, such as Weiss Schwarz, is a system where instead of developing a game based on a single franchise, they instead are able to base it on multiple franchises. They make a system and they kind of shop it around to brands who maybe don't have enough going for them to make their own game and offer to make it for a set. It gives, fans new merchandise, gives them a game to play, gives the actual brand, a way to make a game without having to take like a lot of the investment and risk. A lot of these can be done fairly cheaply because they might only exist for one set. They might only get one set's worth of content out of each franchise, and it does create a bit of insanity. For instance, Weiss Schwarz is a system where you can have both, you can have an anime character from the anime Fairy Tail versus a video game character from Persona 4 versus editing software with Vocaloid. Yes, that's it's music editing software. So you can have just this crazy this crazy mashup of characters made possible by simply having a system that can handle all of it. The idea is that it's a more flexible system where each setup can have its own special win condition. You guys are probably familiar with Weiss Schwarz because there's a good chance that a franchise you like had a set based on it. There have been a few games that have been as successful as Weiss Schwarz in this regard. It helps that Weiss Schwarz is out of Japan, where a lot of the anime and stuff, a lot of those sorts of cult hits have a better opportunity to get going somewhere. However, we're not actually talking about Weiss Schwarz today because Weiss Schwarz is still in print. Instead, we are going to be taking a look at Universal Fighting System, or UFS. This is another game from the early 2000s, from the aughts, although it's from the late aughts. It's more around made itself known around 2007, 2008. That was when it had its big heyday. 2006. After a lot of the surge happened, but before a lot of what we see today. So sort of the tail end of that big rush, and it is a game that is based on fighting games such as Street Fighter. So of course I'm using my man Dan here. So what this is it's called Universal Fighting System because what it does is it takes fighting game mechanics and puts them into card form. And this is different from the Exceed fighting system that I showed off before. I honestly think UFS is a lot better at doing that because Exceed, if you remember, had like that weird movement system where the characters had to move around and there was range and stuff. And that was, to sort of superficially simulate a fighting screen, but having to move the cards around on a map like that, I've explained how that's a problem in another video. In this case, it does borrow a lot. I know there's a lot of stuff to look at on this card, but one thing that helps is if you are familiar with fighting game terminology, a lot of that vocabulary, then you will have a much easier time understanding how this game is played. For example, if you are familiar with the terms low, mid, high, combo, and gauge, you'll have a pretty easy time figuring this out. But Anyway, let's get down to brass tacks. Now, UFS is a game where you play as a character. It's a game with an avatar card, so this is my Dan avatar card, and what you do is you attempt to reduce your opponent's health to 0 from a starting total that actually depends on each character. This Dan actually has 24 health, which is actually considerably below average. They also have, each character also has a designated hand size, which, again, this Dan is lower than average. Dan is the joke character from Street Fighter, which makes sense, but his big shtick is that he has a lot of card flow. He has an ability that he can use on his turn that allows him to draw a ton of cards into his hand and refill himself back up to 7, and it's a very good ability. Now that's great, that's your main character card, that's pretty straightforward and easy to understand, but what is your deck made out of? Well, your deck is going to be made out of 2 different types of cards: attack cards and foundation cards. Now, these cards have a lot of similar mechanics, but they do also do different things. Now, attack cards are what you're going to use to try to damage your opponent, in case that wasn't fairly obvious from the name attack. And foundation cards are cards that they are your resource cards. Attacks are the moves you perform during the fight. The foundations are the experience, the abilities that your character essentially brings to the fight that they're tapping into in order to help them win. For example, we have Dan here in this picture. He is the world champion. So on your turn, what you do is you have a bar. You have a bar that you play attacks onto, and you can play several attacks and foundations on your turn in order to try to get them into play. For example, if I start with Still Dragon and I successfully do that, then I can attempt to play World Champion, and if I successfully do that, I can do Saikyo Ryu, and so on and so on and so on. What happens is, on this chain, each attack and foundation has what is called a difficulty stat. You can see here, Still Dragon has a difficulty of 4, and World Champion has a difficulty of 2. And this is the number that you have to nail your check on in order to make the attack actually perform. So this is sort of the game's resource system. It's this combined with the use of foundation. So what happens is, if I were to say already have World Champion in play, let's just say it's down here, and I play Still Dragon, what I do is I then flip the top card of my deck in an attempt to see if I make the check. So this is similar to the Destiny system seen in a lot of games made by Decipher. So you folks familiar with like the Star Wars game and that, probably familiar with the Destiny mechanic. And if I were to flip up the card, I then make my check. So this number down here is the check. This number up in the top corner here is the difficulty. This number down here is the check or our destiny. And I need to check and see if my check is higher than the move difficulty. Uh-oh, I'm in a bit of trouble because Escape the Island's check is only a 3 versus Still Dragon's difficulty of 4. Now, normally this would mean that the attack fails and my turn is over. However, I can take the foundations that I already have in play and do what I think is probably one of the better replacements for the term tap and commit. They actually use the term commit to denote when you are turning a card sideways. I like this. It also works for fighting game terminology, because what happens is in a lot of these games, a lot of it is, you know, frame by frame, that sort of thing. So when your character commits to attack, that means you're going for it. You're not going to try to move or do any blocks. You're committing to that attack. So I like the idea that you are committing a foundation to get that attack through. So for each card that I commit, I increase my check by 1. I can actually check my hero card as well. So you basically start the game with 1 free foundation in play, and thus that brings the check up to 4, which means that Still Dragon is now successful. There are also cards that allow you to block. Now what happens is with Still Dragon, this is the attack speed. It is a speed of 4, which is really, really good. And it deals 4 damage. Now what my opponent can do is they can attempt to play a block. Now a block, there are cards that have a block value here, and what these cards, there are other games that I've seen that do fighting games that have like their own determined block cards, and those, in my opinion, just kind of clutter up the deck. In this case, some cards have block values and others actually do not. Dan's Fireball actually does not have a block value for it, although it does have special rules, meaning that it can cancel out a ranged attack. Basically, he shoots the fireball at the ranged attack to make it stop. But what happens is, if my opponent tries to block, then they take the speed of the card and add it to the value here listed on the block. You notice that that Dan here actually has a block here of +0. Now, wait, isn't this guy not in my deck? Why do these cards have stats? I'll get into that later. But what happens is he then has to make a check against my 4 speed plus his 1. He would have to get a check of 5, and let's say he flips up Saikyo-Ryu, which gives him a check of 4 versus my difficulty of 5. So he would have to now commit foundations in order to make this block successful. Now, what happens is, after I play Still Dragon, it doesn't go away. It actually stays in, they call it the card pool, but you could also call it the combo string. So I can now play another card. I can now attempt to play the World Champion card, which has a difficulty of 2. Now that seems like it would be super easy to get off, but here's the thing. For each card in my card pool, the difficulty of the next card goes up by 1. So even though World Champion's listed difficulty is 2, because Still Dragon is in play, its difficulty now becomes 3. So if I flip the next card of my deck and I get Boxing Ring, which has a check of 3, hooray! I have played World Champion successfully. So basically, I can do this until I either fail a check or I choose not to play anymore. So if in this case I choose not to play any more cards, I end my turn. Now at the end of my turn, these 2 cards actually go to 2 different places, and surprisingly, they do not go to the discard pile. Any attack that you successfully perform instead goes under your character into their gauge as momentum. This is similar to another fighting game mechanic, which is known as gauge, where what happens is if you perform a successful attack, you gain some gauge, which you can then spend to do more fancy tricks later. There are cards that use gauge to either increase the power of an attack, or some even create multiples of an attack. Like you can, like there are moves that, like where you like spin or like do a jump in the air, which like hit multiple times. This you can turn these momentum into basically copies of that card to try to hit multiple times. And foundations, like I said before, go into my resource area. Foundations have abilities that you can use to commit rather than committing them to pay costs. They have some useful abilities as well, so you can build these up for a while. These all have a lot of really useful things. And the balancing mechanic, I'm sure you have caught on, is that some cards have higher difficulty or lower check. So the tendency is attacks tend to have a high difficulty and low check, while foundations tend to have low difficulty and high check. So you need a good combination of both. Having foundations, not only can you get them into play to make it easier for you to play attack cards, but their high check makes it easier to play cards in general. So usually the stronger the card, the higher the difficulty and the lower the check. So for example, the card Beefy has the same difficulty as Still Dragon despite being a foundation, because its effect is just that good. You commit it to pay for basically anything, and then it stays down and it increases your maximum hand size, which is what you draw up to at the start of your turn. It's actually, let's get back to character cards, because I'm sure you've noticed the character cards also have the difficulty and the block and the check, and that is because you can include more character cards in your deck. You can use it to play a new version of your character which gets the best stats from all of them. However, because they also provide low block, they provide a +0 on your block, so they don't increase the difficulty to block at all, and they have a check of 6. This is true across all of them. In fact, most starter decks tend to include 2 copies of every hero card, so drawing this card is not a dead draw. It has its uses as a cheap block and as a good a good check. Some more things about hero cards. Hero cards also have the disciplines. They have these 3 icons here, which tells you what cards this character is capable of using. So, for example, there's a big red spot on Dan here, so all the cards I have in his deck also have that red spot on him, so he's always guaranteed to be able to use them. A rule is that you must build a combo string out of cards that share the same discipline. At least that's what I remember, so that's why I built a deck that was entirely 100% consisting of red cards. So this affects what a character can do. So each character has their own list of talents. This is the mechanic that allows them to open up the ability to include more franchises, such as Soul Calibur, is each character has a set of disciplines that they can use, and that affects deck building. There are lots of disciplines out there, but the ability to just easily identify them based on these icons here is what makes deck building plausible. Now, I'm sure you've already seen them because I flipped them up, but there are also two more types of cards in this game. There are asset cards and action cards. Now, these behave similarly to the attacks and the foundations before. The asset cards basically behave like foundations. They go into play in your area with all of your foundations. However, the only difference is you cannot commit an asset to help pay for a difficulty cost. So they tend to have stronger abilities that you can use to offset that. For example, Boxing Ring allows you to create smash tokens. Becky, let me smash. And you can remove a smash token to ready any other card. So this has some abilities of allowing you to reuse your foundations multiple times. And then there are action cards, which behave like attack cards in that they go away at the end of the turn. However, they are not considered attacks and thus cannot be blocked. Although you can see down here that by the end of UFS, they actually went kind of nuts and had cards that had multiple abilities. So you can also play this card as an attack. So just a bit of fun madness there. Anyway, I remember this game being a blast. Like I said, I had this Dan deck here because he had his ability to just keep drawing into more cards, which meant he could do a lot of really good combo abilities. However, because of how the system worked, you could do ridiculous things, such as, you know, paying for the ability Sardines Beach Special with Dan's foundation of schoolgirl innocence. So that's an image I don't know if I want in my brain, but now you have it in there too. So it's a really fun game. The fact that they could be so flexible with it, and the fact that it actually really does make much better use of fighting game terminology, is why I personally fell in love with this game. So what happened to this game? Well, they implemented a little thing called set rotation, and I have a whole video about set rotation if you want to know about it, the pros and cons. But the thing is, with a sort of mega license game like this, if you rotate out the older cards, not only are you rotating out the older cards, you're also rotating out like the characters and the franchises that people bought your game for to begin with, and that's kind of a big no-no for a game like this. This game, it was doing pretty well until it implemented its first rotation, and then it just kind of fell off the face of the earth. It's kind of a poster child for rotating because it's what the big boys do. It's the reason. It's the game that I largely cite as an example of set rotation done wrong. Although I'm sure a few of you have already noticed and written in the comments that even though it is the end of UFS, it's actually not entirely gone, because it rebranded itself as Universus. Yeah, all of you guys who didn't bother to watch the video and are posting comments furiously, you may pause the video freely to go and wipe the egg off your face. So yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it, having a game on my Cards from the Abyss series that technically still has a modern iteration. I guess maybe this is the spooky sequel to Cards from the Abyss. It's Return from the Abyss. Ooh, extra scary. So, anyway, this is Universus by Jasco Games, and in this My Hero Academia 2-player starter set, we will find that it is, in fact, exactly the same game. It has the same numbers. I'm sure you recognize the placement of these by now, although they've moved the hand size and health limit, but I'm sure by now you recognize how a lot of these cards go together, although I have to admit this box is kind of unwieldy. It has this big ol' like hinge flap design, but it's not thick enough to hold the cards on edge, and it's a bit of a messy box if you ask me. I like my boxes to be practical, as to be functional along with being attractive. But you know, that's just me. I'm the guy who always talks about the boxes. You know me, the boxes. So this is the My Hero Academia. They label it as the My Hero Academia trading card game, but on the back you can see it says Universes. So I've talked a little bit about My Hero Academia. I think I gave it some lip service in my birthday video, where it's basically a world where nearly everybody on Earth has superpowers. So they're called quirks in this universe. Izuku Midoriya is our main character, technically, and he actually received his powers from All Might, who is basically Superman. Superman as written by somebody who actually understands Superman as a character. I can't stress that enough. People complain about what kind of character Superman is. Go and watch you some My Hero Academia, watch what All Might does, and understand what the character of Superman really means. And over here we have Katsuki Bakugo, who is his rival. He has the Midoriya basically has super strength as his ability, although his power is hard to control and he winds up hurting himself almost as often as he winds up hurting the bad guy. Bakugo has power over explosions, which is his ability. Can use that, like for rocket boosting and for big heavy punches, and he's kind of a rage machine. Although, like I said before, this game functions exactly the same. Comparing ourselves with the old Dan card again, we still have the difficulty, the block, and the check all in the same places, although the hand size and heart and disciplines have all been rearranged on the card, but you can pretty clearly read this and tell that it's from the same game. Same game! Same game! Ah! No. This time it's on purpose without being lazy. It's a reinvigoration of a game that had pretty much fallen away. It's a rebranding, not just a lazy knockoff. One thing I do notice about here is they do have a bit of a mishmash of fonts. I'm sure some of you, any of you layout students out there know a thing about that. Like, it looks like there's like 3 different fonts for the numbers, whereas over here it's all the same font. It looks a bit cluttered, honestly, but I guess they're going for like these big flashy numbers and stuff to maybe make it look a little bit more like a comic book. I don't know. Call me old-fashioned. I actually kind of like how these old images look. It is another game that uses stock pictures, but as I detail in another one of my videos, the one on licensing, use of stock assets is only a crime when it is done poorly. If you manage to use your stock assets wisely and well, then, that can be about as good as any old good-fashioned artwork is. I just realized something I forgot to mention was I was talking about like the direction. So Izuku, you can tell his stats are all about you can discard your hand to increase your damage by 10. That's that sort of self-harm for power I was talking about. One thing that I forgot to mention about these attacks is that they have a hit zone, and the cards also have a block zone. So remember when I said, like at the very beginning of this video, low, mid, and high? That refers to low attacks, middle attacks, and high attacks. So a high attack is like a blow to the head, middle attack is a punch to the gut, and a low attack is a sweep of the leg. So all very, very valid fighting styles. And what happens is each attack, which is a bit more clear to see here compared to the older cards. With the older cards, the direction of the attack is determined by a little X over here. Here it's actually a straight up arrow, so you can tell a lot more clearly where each attack is going. That's the zone that it hits. So Aspiring Punch is a middle hit card, so in order to block it, I would ideally want to use a card with a middle block. So Yoga Strong Punch is a middle block here. So what happens is we do the 5 speed of the Aspiring Punch plus the 1 to the block to give me a difficulty of 6 to overcome. If I succeed on this block, since it's a middle attack being blocked by a middle block, that actually nullifies all of the damage. If, however, I were to block it with Turn It On, which is a high block, then I would take half damage. So you can block with adjacent zones. You can use a high block to block a middle block, to block a middle attack. You could use a low block to block a middle attack, but you could not use like a high block to block a low attack. That's just, protecting your face when they're kicking your shins. So that is why cards that give a middle block, like most character cards, is useful, because it will always block at least half of the damage. Although the combination of mix-ups and attacks like Yoga Strong Punch is a high hit. That mix-up of different attacks in order to get through an opponent's guard is another thing to consider. Like I said, I love how UFS and Universes really captures that essence of fighting games, that back and forth, that strategy, without having to do something dumb like having characters move all over the place. This is a lot more simple, a lot easier to understand. Bakugo actually has a different ability. Izuku can dump his hand to deal increased damage. Bakugo actually has an effect that after your blocked Fury attack resolves, you can discard it from your card pool. Now, you might remember how I was talking before about the card pool, and here's a nice character sheet, a nice mat here. So we have the card pool, and you see it goes +0, +1. That's how much each additional card adds to the difficulty. So what Bakugo does is if he were to miss with his attack, he discards it so he can play another attack without the difficulty increasing. So that makes him kind of more relentless. Bakugo seems like he'd be a scary, really scary character. I mean, Izuku has these big, powerful hits, although I think most of them are mid attacks. Oh, he has some high ones in there, like Determined Victory Smash. Smash, Becky. So he has a couple of high ones mixed in for good measure, although I guess because he uses nothing but punch attacks in this iteration, he doesn't have any low. Oh, he does have some low. He has Velocity Punch, so this is what a card that hits low looks like. Like I said, it is literally the same game. We have our foundations here, we have our attacks here, although there's a lot of foundations in this deck. I guess that's because the game, you're going through a lot of cards, you know, you're drawing back up to your hand size each turn, you're flipping cards to determine your checks, and what happens is these cards, if you run out of your deck, you actually shuffle your discard pile back into your deck, and then you mill the top 10 cards of your deck for each time you have reshuffled. So basically the first time you run out, you mill the top 10, the second time you mill the top 20. The third time you might have so many cards floating around in limbo, like foundations you have in play or cards, attacks that act as momentum, that your third time through might actually be enough to deck you out, because if there are no cards left over after that mill, then you lose by deck out. So yeah, it's possible to cycle through your deck multiple times in this game. I guess that's the idea here by having so few attacks and so many foundations in the Midoriya deck, although you only get one copy of the character card. Like I said, the starter decks used to come with two character cards because they are both a high check and perfect block card. Also, maybe to have one to spend and one to lend, so you can have one that you can trade with a friend who bought the other starter deck. But yeah, along with it's a much flashier design. Although, like I said, you could easily tell like the bright orange for the attack and the gray for the foundation. It's exactly the same as what we had with Dan. So I literally could take my old Dan deck from 2008 and play it against the Midoriya deck if I felt like showing off. I guess that's possible. I don't know if these characters, do they have any discipline? It looks like both Bakugo and Dan have the skull discipline on them. Oh, and Izuku and Dan have this sort of halo over here. I actually can't remember what these are called. These disciplines actually have names. I don't think they included a list of them in the instruction book, but they actually have names to them, although thanks to their use of symbols, that's largely unimportant. But yeah, that is a look at Universes. They actually sent me this. The Jasco Games actually sent me this starter deck, and that's not all they sent me. They actually sent me a booster box as well, a 24-pack My Hero Academia booster box, and I will definitely be opening this on camera. I hope I get Yaoyorozu. She's my favorite character. That natural leadership, that the fact that she's a literal toolbox, she's cool. So yeah, that is UFS, now known as Universes, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off. Join us next time on Cards from the Abyss.